I have seen this world's demise. Morsleib, the accursed orb, waxes large, impossibly large. The moon will fall, the oceans will boil, the mountains will break. To the stars some will go, but the stars themselves will abandon this world. The scratching beyond the walls can only mean one thing. The vermin are here. It is they that gnaw at the frayed edges of the world. Ceaselessly they plot, tirelessly they agitate. Yet never once do they imagine that they too are puppets, moving upon the strings they never envisioned. The worst is still ahead. These are the end times.
Hi again, YouTube land viewers. Welcome again to the Philosopher's Den, where we're going through more of the end times, but now we are on to the glorious end times Thanquol. This is the fourth book in the great saga of the Warhammer world. So after coming to the conclusion of the highly political Cain tome, here we find ourselves hoping that we get maybe a little bit more lighthearted, and I'm sure the Skaven have lots to offer along that regard. So right out of the gates, I think I'm going to offer it up to the biggest Skaven fan that I know. He's been chittering for weeks about this in the hopes to get to the Thanquol book, so I'm going to pass it off to my philosopher Vince to let us know about the state of the nation for the Skavens.
Absolutely. It's nice that finally in Book 4 we meet the real protagonist of our tale in End Times, the true heroes, which is the Skaven. And it's funny because at the same time, when we open on this book, we open in 2522, which if we cast our mind back to sort of the first book of Nagash, right, that's when you first time you get a year labeled, it's 2524. So this is really going on. We start before everything, so once again we're running sort of commensurately. And so this is the beginning of the Black Years. And it begins with an uprising that the Skaven come up from underground. They've been planning this for a long time. Several times in the past, they have come very near to toppling entire nations, the Red Pox in Bretonnia, the Black Plague in the Empire, and so on. But every time they sort of collapse in on themselves, as the Skaven don't want to do. But this is supposed to be the conquering to end all conquerings. And so they're preparing for a new uprising. And the first thing that they do is they surface up in the Border Princes, which is not too far away from their capital, if you know where Skaven Blight is located in the world. And they completely wipe Tilia and Estalia off the map. So, 2 Border Prince nations down. They also cause some chaos in the others. And basically, they cause just a heap of destruction and death, take a lot of people as slaves, and so on and so forth. Now, if we cast our mind back to Nagash so long ago, we remember that Manfred wanders through this area and comes upon some Skaven in his hunt for the Fellblade when he's trying to resurrect Nagash, and he sort of is one of the first ones to take note of this destruction. We also remember that there we saw a council meeting of the 13, the Lords of Decay, the rulers of the Skaven. And at that meeting, the Grey Seer, which is Critislick, he basically, was sort of running his mouth, and he got incinerated by the Horned Rat, who then showed up and was like, all right, listen, everybody, enough of this crap. It's time for a new plan. We're taking over the world. And so the Horned Rat, Pinky, and the Brains, the council, and says, get your together, it's time, and he kind of leaves. Unfortunately, the Skaven, in traditional Skaven fashion, do not, in fact, get together and become of one mind. First thing they all think is, we got an open seat on the council, let's do this. And so they all start bickering and discussing and trying to fill it, because if any one of the clans gets a second seat on the council, instantly they have basically dominance in Skaven politics. Skaven, the only political system that can make the elves look like they have a very refined and civil system. So at the end, basically, they come together and say, you know what? Let's just leave it empty. Because if they don't, they know that's just going to cause a civil war, and that will really derail everything. And the other big thing that happens from this is Critoslic was the only Grey Seer on the council. Everybody else is just one of the head of the clans. Either they're a plague priest or a warlord or something like that. He was the only Grey Seer. And the other members of the Lords of Decay basically take this as a sign that the Grey Seers have failed, and that they are no longer the servants or the true spokesman of the Horned Rat as they have always claimed to be. And so the Grey Seers fall, actually, not only from the council, but just their political situation. They go from the top of the heap to the bottom pretty fast. Some of them sell themselves out to warlord clans, some get murdered, and the rest all make their way into Skaven Blight to the Tower of the Horned Rat, where they all pull the trigger on doing something that you should never do, and that is they summon a Vermin Lord. So they're trying to summon a regular old Vermin Lord, as if that's a thing. And they talk very specifically about how those Skaven who are stupid enough to do this rarely survive it. And they summon a Vermin Lord, but the person who comes through isn't just a regular old Vermin Lord as they expect. Instead, it's a very specific Vermin Lord who, although we don't get his name right there, it's sort of implied who exactly he is. And he imparts upon them the secret of a powerful ritual that they can do that will perhaps open doors. And as it says, the Skaven are excited because they think it's going to be a door opening doors to power. Sometime later, they will come to regret that doors open mean things can walk through from both sides. And this ritual that they do is about the moon, which I'm going to butcher its name, so if one of you two wants to pronounce it correctly, as we know pronunciations are not my specialty. Morsleeb? Is that right?
Yeah, just the 2 syllables, Morsleeb.
Morsleeb, okay.
That's how
I was pretty close.
I thought that this moment was a really big deal, actually. When we think about Grey Seers in the culture of Skaven, always been the top of the heap. Like, I mean, it translates to the game as well. Like, I mean, your Grey Seer is almost invariably your warlord as well. Well, I mean, not your warlord in fighty fashion, but as far as the leadership for your army, for your Skaven army, that's the guy. And a staple and a mainstay in every Skaven army. So the one passage that you pointed out where they've fallen so far from grace that they don't even have power within the clans anymore, although some of them stick around as consultants and advisors. That's the only role they have, otherwise they'd become pariahs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a major shift in the society, all because of this one action on the Council of 13, right? Mm-hmm. And it makes them desperate enough to do this, to summon this Vermin Lord, and then even more desperate enough to try this ritual. And so the ritual is to pull. The Skaven have always been fascinated by Morsleeb because it's where Warpstone comes from, or where they think Warpstone comes from, I should say. They don't exactly have rocket ships to go verify that, but they're pretty sure it's where it comes from. They all just know that they are drawn to the moon. And so it's a big green moon, and they decide they're going to pull it closer, because if they can pull it real close to the world, then it will be as though they're all chewing Warpstone all the time. Their lives will be extended, they'll become more powerful, their magic will be unstoppable, and so on and so forth. And they basically not only learn the ritual, but they learn that the foul lizardmen are the ones keeping them from fully tapping into the power of the moon. And now with the secret, they're able to defeat these foul lizard things. And they grab that moon and in true supervillain fashion start pulling it towards the world. As I say, sometimes in inches, sometimes in miles, which I'm not sure if inches would make much of a difference. The moon is probably pretty far away. But anyway, that's fine. They make it bigger. It gets very close. And then, boom, the Tower of the Horned Rat explodes. Grey Seers are dropping like flies to do this, by the way. Like, they're dying from the ritual, but they're doing it. They're beating the foul Slan. They're pulling the moon down, and then an explosion rocks the tower, kills a bunch of them, those who live and survive, find that the ritual can no longer be called to their mind. Now, at the same time, the greatest rival to the power of the Grey Seers has always been Clan Skyer, the wealthiest of the clans. We'll talk about them more later, but basically they're the War Machine guys. It's that simple. They love Warpstone too. And they want the Warpstone in that moon, but they've got a slightly different plan. And that plan comes from one Icket Claw, the mad genius of Skyer, who has been ever evolving the Doom Rocket, everybody's favorite weapon. Who doesn't love a good Doom Rocket?
I love a great Doom Rocket.
Absolutely. Maybe the best item you can put on a 15-point character? I would say so.
Oh, yeah.
And so, just as the Doom Rocket destroys units, so does he want to build the biggest Doom Rocket ever to go destroy the moon. He's going to shoot the moon with a giant rocket and blow it up, and that's what they're working on. So they have. We literally have two James Bond villain plans going on here simultaneously that the Skaven are both trying to complete.
It's such wonderful stuff. Like, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, Keith, after the heavy politics, but what I love about the Skaven is there's no task that is beyond their reach, right? Like they'll find a way to do anything. Just like Yoda says, there is do or do not. There is no try.
Exactly. Size matters not. Doesn't matter. It's a moon. We're gonna blow that thing out of the sky. Like, you think we take out steam tanks easy enough? Just wait till you see what we do to the moon. So
just to hear from Keith a little bit, what's your perception of the Skaven, and what do you know? What's your attitude about the Skaven going into this book in the first place?
Yeah, well, I think they're hilarious. I think Vince said it great when he said that they're basically Bond villains, right? Like, I mean, he's trying to blow up the moon. What's not to love? And yeah, I really like the scheming, backstabbing, kind of politicking aspect for them. And they're kind of in that vein. They're kind of the polar opposites to the Lizardmen, which are like completely obedient, subservient to their slams, and they all act with a single purpose and a single mind. And then, that's totally counterintuitive to your, chaos-loving, exploding Ratman, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, they're always. I've always kind of viewed them as the most unique of the Warhammer races. I mean, you can draw parallels to all the other Warhammer races outside of it into other fantasy realms. Whether you want to draw parallels to Tolkien. Or other writers. Everybody else has some other preconceived association. But Skaven, I think, I don't know of their vermin-like race existing anywhere else. So that's why I've always kind of attracted to them. They're so uniquely Warhammer.
Absolutely, they're so wonderful. They have they're fun and yet murderous all at the same time. They have such unique personalities. The clans, if I just described to you, this is a race of savage, underground dwelling, cannibalistic murderers. Your next word wouldn't be, but they're hilarious fun. And yet that is absolutely what follows. And it just has to be with the way that they write them. But they are very Warhammer. The combination of the comical and the violent.
Good. Well, we derailed you a little bit there to hear from Keith, but we'll let you get back on track with what's happening in Skaven, Vince.
No, you're fine. It's perfectly fair, because the reality is I could probably go for an hour just talking about it.
Okay, so we have the towers blown up, the ritual has ended, and Skyer is fashioning their own devices.
You got it. And that basically sets up where we are, sort of at the start of the story. And all of this, by the way, is in anticipation of what they're calling the Great Uprising, right? So the rocket is trying to be finished, the moon is being pulled. All of this is supposed to be in time for the Great Uprising, this master plan that is being hatched. So there we go.
Yeah. Good. Well, maybe what we should do before we launch into the first chapter is, let's have a brief talk about the various different clans and what they're up to. So you've already mentioned Clan Skyer, which is the predominant clan, and their job, of course, is to blow up the moon. So they're doing everything to do that with people like Icket Claw, and they mentioned another fellow came named Zinjtail, who's in charge of that project. But maybe we'll just kind of go through a couple of the other major clans so we know how they're going to play a part here. We're going to see a lot of Clan Pestilens in the early going. These are the clan that's a little bit, I guess, predisposed to making contagions and poxes and those kinds of things. They were the creators of the red pox that nearly crippled Bretonnia ages and ages past. And they've always been in the Warhammer lore a great opponent to the Lizardmen, because they're one of the few clans that has really gotten a toehold over in Lustria. And they've tunneled, if you can imagine the Warhammer world, they've tunneled all the way from the old world under the ocean and come up the other side into Lustria through many tunnels, both from the old world and from the Southlands. But they are the main protagonist in the attack against the Lizardmen in this land. Lord Skrolk is the name that we'll hear lots over the next little bit as he's leading that. But so we'll leave that for now, and maybe Keith, you want to tell us about the other clans and what they're up to in the early goings.
Sure. So we've got Clan Molder. Clan Molder is the second richest Skaven clans after Clan Scryer. And these guys are the master mutators. So these guys hang out in a place called Hellpit, for which the Hellpit Abomination is named after. And these are the furry folks who are making things like your rat ogres, your giant rats, anything to do with mutation and creation, manipulation, all that kind of stuff is what they're into. And we know through some brief little hints in that opening kind of prologue that they have been collaborating with Scryer on something, and something big is going down. So a couple of the main players, I won't really get into it now, but Throth the Unclean, he's one of the 9 Lords of Hellpit, and he's in charge of collaborating with the Kickoff on their sneaky little project they're working on. We don't really know a lot about Clan Eshin as far as what they're doing. These guys are the assassins, right? So you've got your assassins, your gutter runners, and your night runners. And these guys, one interesting bit that it was mentioned in that prologue was it seems that they've kind of always either been in league with or working along with the Grey Seers, and that the other Lords of Decay, those Skaven who sit on the Council of 13, they were afraid to withdraw their support from the Grey Seers until Eshin had withdrawn their support. So that's a pretty big deal. They have a lot of clout, but they work from the shadows. And then you've got a lot of your general warlord clans. You got lots of clan rats, lots of slaves, and then marching on. And so really what's going on right now is you're getting the Great Uprising is being divided into 3 stages. There's going to be attack on the dwarves, there's going to be attack on Nuln, and then there's going to be attack on Lustria.
Yeah, so worth mentioning, Clan Moors is not one of the primary clans, but is the greatest of the warlord clans, led by the famous Queek Headtaker, and they're situated in the City of Pillars / Karak 8 Peaks / Skarsnik's Lair area. So he's going to come up later in this tale as well as a bit of a big deal. One last thing I think that we're going to touch on, though, before we launch into the chapter 1 is we have to talk about our title guy. We have to talk about Thanquol. So why is this book named Thanquol? Well, first of all, because in Warhammer story, he is probably one of the most famous of all Skaven characters. He's a Grey Seer with great ambitions who is always trying to get his way onto the seat of the Council of 13. And of course, with recent developments, no more has that been seen by him as a possibility than right now. So he, in fact, in a little bit of a sidebar here where we first introduce him, he is scheming in a dark tunnel with some shadowy figure and his companion that's always with him, Bone Ripper, the mutated rat ogre, at his side. And he has a bit of an exchange with this shadowy figure who, as we read along, we discover to be an agent of Clan Eshin. And it's revealed in this exchange between the two of them that Thanquol has paid these guys off because he is a master schemer to propagate the blowing up of the tower and all of his Gracier colleagues. So why has he done this? Well, we don't entirely know right now. Obviously, we feel that Thanquol has come to the conclusion that this is going to help him specifically, because he has been assigned at this point to go with some Clan Scryer representatives on the expedition to Nuln, and he's not too happy about it, so he needs to work some other things behind the scenes to make sure that he's in the forefront of those that are working the Council of 13. Vince, do you have any things to add to that moment before we launch in?
I love the way he uses Skitterleap. He's Skitterleaped aside into this random dark tunnel to have this meeting. So he can chew some warpstone, because he has like the worst of warpstone addicts, which are a couple nice little touches. It's cool to see. Like, his Skitterleap in this sort of world would be very powerful. He's effectively a teleporter, right? He can just kind of bounce around as he wants and bring his giant mutated friend with him, which is always nice.
Yeah, that can happen in the game. I wish you could bring a pal with you when you Skitterleaped. That would be super fun. Anyway.
One thing that I thought was cool about that, I think it explains it in the rules paragraph, not actually in the story, but I believe this is the 13th iteration of Bone Ripper. So his friends, takes bullets every now and again, and he gets Clan Mulder to stitch him back together, and because this is the 13th of Ripper, he's the biggest and baddest of all.
Yeah, you always got to buy a new one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like investing in a crappy car, right? So you go to the used car lot and you buy a shitty car, and it only lasts you for so long. So you just keep investing in the shitty car, and that's what you get.
Such a Skaven thing to do.
Yeah. No, except
I'd like to think he has a sympathy and love for that giant mutated pile of bones and metal at this point. I mean, it's been with him for so long and died so many times to save his life. I imagine he has whatever passes for attachment in the Skaven mind.
I don't think so. I think he's a user straight through and through. He doesn't give a hell.
He doesn't care. He pees all over it to market, but that's as far as his affection goes.
Good. All right. Well, let's launch into chapter 1, shall we? Keith, as a Lizardman sympathizer that you are, we'll hand it over to you to tell us what's going on in the jungles.
All right. So we open up in Lustria from the point of view of the skink priest Teto Echo. So old Teto, he is a master astronouncer and is quite good at predicting the future. So he's situated in Zlatlan, which we'll talk about a lot in a little bit. But he is finding right now that his predictions are being screwed up because Morslab is looming high in the sky, which totally wrecks all his astrological predictions. And without that, he's pretty much blind. And that goes for all the slams. So a lot of how Lizardmen work is they can predict the future, and then they can send off their Saurus legions to go deal with the problems before it ever even happens. But that's getting screwed up. So he can cast his Farsight, though, and he can see a way that Krokgar, one of the greatest Oblud fighters, he's the guy who rides around on his Carnosaur called Grimlock. We'll talk about that copyright infringement names later, Games Workshop. So he's riding around on Grimlock, fighting this war against the Chaos Demons. So there's this massive rent in one of the old Lizardman cities from the Great Invasion, or the Great Cataclysm, where chaos tore itself into the world. And demons are just constantly pouring out of it. So Gorok is hard-pressed, and all of the temple cities of the Lizardmen have basically sent troops to help stop this massive demon invasion. But it's bleeding the Lizardmen's strengths completely dry. The other thing is that over the last, however many thousands of years, Chaos have been destroying what the Slan set up called the geomantic webs. So all of their cities are situated across the world, and they've got all nodes across the planet on that, but Lustria is particularly attuned to it. These sites that can channel power, if you like, from the earth. And this is the thing that kind of gives the Lizardmen their strength, and it's something that the Slan can draw on to do great acts of magic and geomancy and stuff like that. But those nodes are being destroyed. Now, as we enter Lustria, the Skaven are planning a three-pronged attack on three cities. Zlatlan, which is the city of the moon, where we find Teto Echo. Itza, which is the first city. And Zlanhuapek, which is the city of the mists, and that was the second city established by the Lizardmen. And all those cities are at key points in that geomantic web, so they're of key strategic value in this land's power. So, yeah, that's where Clan Postilions, with the backing of the Council of 13, are launching their attack. So what's going on is at Vlanvat, Teto Echo is being assailed by a large horde of Clan Postilion plague monks. Also, Clan Postilions, they're involved in a lot of recruiting of what they call Thrall clans. It's not ones that are devout Postilion followers, but they're more interested in more slaves and converting other Skaven to the ways of Ubos rather than getting money like a couple of the other clans.
Keith, I just wanted to interject, and maybe before we go and talk about the Skaven launch, we should talk about what's the state of the Slan mages.
Right. Well, I was just gonna bring up Mazdamundi.
Ah, okay. I'll let you run.
So Mazdamundi is the greatest living Slan, and he wakes up because he feels a disturbance in the Force, and it's not good. And the worst part was he was having this really great dream that was sent from to the old ones. That were going to guide him, but it's gone. So as the Grey Seers are pulling down Morsleb, the Slan are combating it, but due to the intervention of the Vermin Lord, all the Slan become totally overwhelmed. And the force of the Skaven pulling and the Slan pushing is causing the moon to break apart, and giant meteorites are falling all over the world. But Mazdamundi, being the greatest mage in the entire old world, is able to deflect the meteorites, put mental shields over all of the Lizardmen so that the corrupting power of the warp stone doesn't affect them. And then even when the meteorites hit in non-important areas, he's able to dampen the blast. But unfortunately, the strain of keeping the moon at bay has rendered all of the Slan comatose, and in those final acts of power, Mazdamundi is also knocked unconscious. So the Lizardmen are completely without guidance at this point. Well, what do you guys think of that?
I think we keep meeting a lot of the greatest wizards in the old world. Like every book introduces a new greatest wizard in the old world. Like Nagash is rolling around, we got Teclis, we got Mazdamundi. I mean, we're going to need some kind of cage match to determine who, in fact, is the greatest sorcerer in the old world. There's a lot of people who've got stake on this claim.
Yeah, it's the problem with capitalist advertising. I mean, everybody's got the best pizza in the world. You know, these are the best stocks in the world, etc. And there's 95 people making that claim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, this speaks to, and maybe this we need to think about the gravity, and I get that's a bit of a shitty pun, but the gravity of what the Skaven are doing with pulling the moon towards them, and what that takes as a strain upon some of the oldest beings on the Warhammer world to stop that from happening. So again, it harkens me back to how big of a deal it is and how much power the Grey Seers still have, even though they don't have any leadership roles in the Skaven anymore. That's what's the biggest deal to me, is to point out how much power those Grey Seers can exert upon the nation to put these Slan into a comatose state.
Yeah, they may be, I mean, one-to-one, certainly the Slan are better wizards than the Grey Seers. Unfortunately, the Slan are not matching up one-to-one, right? There's not a lot of those fat frogs left, but there's a whole lot of gray rats, and they're all chanting in unison using a secret Vermin Lord ritual. Whereas all those frogs have got is, you know, themselves.
Yeah, well, I think the main factor is actually the Vermin Lords that are lending their power to the Grey Seers at this point. I think because in ages past, the Vermin Lord or the Grey Seers have never really been able to crack the slan. The other thing that it mentions that I forgot was that the slan are drawing on that geomantic web of power that entire time, and they completely drain it. So all of the reserves of the Lizardmen are completely gone at this point. Thanks to, as I said, the Grey Seers and the Vermin Lord.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe at this point we should segue a little bit into what Pestilence is doing for preparations. And as we said, they've come across underneath the tunnels through beneath the ocean and arose in Lustria and set up several staging points around the continent. But one of the key things that they do as various little sidebars here is how Lord Skrolk and the Contagion Conclave, is that what they're called? Am I getting that name wrong?
No, you're right. That's what it is. Contagion Conclave.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. They are brewing the greatest pox ever for their plans. So they brought over the Cauldron of 1,000 Poxes, which is this most famous of famous clan pestilence ritualistic things where the most horrific, debilitating diseases are brewed within. So with several months in the making, they start their brew, but they're left in Lustria to refine it and tune it so that it can be instant death to anybody who's exposed. So they have a good little exchange here between Lord Skrolk, who is the overall leader of the Lustria expedition, and a fellow named Grillock, who is stirring away at the pot and leading a few of his plague priests. And he abates himself before Lord Skrolk, and Skrolk reveals to him that the guy who was going to be in charge of this pox is now no longer because he wasn't satisfying his needs. So he elevates Grillock to become the Plague Pontifex. And what a great title. They have a lot of great titles here throughout the Clan Pestilence, actually. And that's one of the ones that I think is really cool. So Grillock suddenly becomes a big player in this Lustria assault by virtue of that little promotion that he gets from Skrolk himself.
Yeah, Skrolk's a great character. He is eyeless. He sees in plague vision, like he sees in disease. That's his vision. And he ripped out his own eyes upon looking at Archlord Nurglich, who is so infested with diseases that he was so beautiful that Skrolk wanted to never see anything again after having seen what he considered perfection. How's that?
It sounds like we've gone back to the Nurgle world, hasn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah,
2 and
like
4 are very
Nurgle.
disease-ridden.
It's like Nurgle, but not as silly. It's like a little bit more serious and a little bit more like, I don't know, sharp.
Yeah, it is a bit more creepy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Vince, did you want to interject with anything else before we launch into the assault on the first Lizardman city?
Nope, I think you got it all.
Okay. Well, Keith, do you want to? That's Tedo Echo's home. So do you want to take us through that one?
Sure. So, the moon coming down and all the meteors and shooting off and stuff, that was the signal for the Skaven to attack. So the Skaven march up to, so Zlatlan has like a big city, it's got a big pyramid in the middle and then little pyramids around it and then a big wall. So you think, okay, we're going to settle down for a bit of a siege here. No. Skaven roll up 3 plague furnaces to the first gate and just smash it down. They roll up 3 plague furnaces to the next gate and smash it down, and they do to the third gate as well. But not to be daunted by this, the Skaven are also assaulting the walls. And to meet them is just a hail of poison bow shot, or poison darts and javelins and all that kind of stuff. But Skaven, in true Skaven numberless fashion, they just start climbing on top of their dead until eventually they can get over the walls. Now the thing about Lizardman society is, without the slan, they really can't do very much. Like, skinks are not good leaders. And as I said, most of the Lizardmen armies are off fighting with Hrothgar, and there's just kind of a token resistant force of Saurus there. So, like, the skinks who are in charge of, like, that statue, if that statue gets broken, all they can think of is fix the statue. So they're really not the best warriors. And Tedoeco is struggling to organize everything. But he knows that his first duty is to protect the Slan, who are comatose. So the little skink attendants to the Slans are trying to wake them up by blowing blue lily powder in their face and all this kind of stuff, and it's not working. There's a bunch of magical traps set around the city as well, but it's just exploding in light because the Slan set them up to banish demons and not really the Skaven at all. So eventually what happens is the Skaven force their way into the city, and there's lots of savage fighting, like, typical the Saurus are strong and stoic. They're tougher and stronger and way more vicious than the Skaven, but there are just more Skaven. And the guys with Pan Castilians are not pushovers themselves. Like, they enjoy flailing themselves to whip themselves into a massive frenzy. So yeah. At one point, Tedoeco enacts a plan. In order to restore some of the city's magical defenses, he orders that the relic priests be brought up. So the relic priests are the mummified remains of old dead Slan mage priests. And they stick those into the magical chambers that are supposed to activate the defenses, and a couple of the glyphs flare, but Tedo's plan doesn't work. So he's kind of in panic mode right now. So being the astromancer that he is, he casts his gaze upwards and finds the biggest, meatiest comet he can and starts pulling it down towards him. And then he kind of starts sounding the evacuation horn. But the skink attendants of the Slans are being all fussy and prissy, and they can't evacuate their Slan unless he's got his favorite little grubs to eat if he ever wakes up, and it's really slowing down the entire process. And there's some really great bits of writing where the Skaven are trying to break into the temples where the Slan are, and they're still being guarded by the Temple Guard. And the Temple Guard are just vicious. They'll just, stand totally motionless as statues, and then as soon as something comes within reach, they're just a blur of motion, and someone's getting their face smashed in. But the Skaven make it into one of the temples, and they drag out two unconscious Slan, and just go into a frenzy, as only rats can, and just rip it apart. So eventually, they get 3 more Slan before the evacuation is kind of getting the move on. And there's this massive procession of Stegodons, which are just smashing their way out of the back of Zlatlan through the jungle to try and get away. And it's at this point that the comet comes down. This comet, in game turns, was cast on turn 1. It came down turn 6. So it's got all of the counters.
Yeah, super gigantic.
Super gigantic comet. And it destroys Zlatlan. It's totally wrecked. Tedo was kind of hoping that some of the Skaven would stop to loot and all that kind of stuff, but these are clan Castilians. They don't care for riches. They're in a frenzy at this point. So their rear guard is pretty hard-pressed. But Comet comes down, pulverizes the city, pulverizes the Skaven army, and actually pulverizes about a third of the Lizardmen that are escaping as well. But fortunately, the Slans are all in their palanquins, which have inbuilt magical shields. So all the Slans survive. They're still unconscious, and Tedoeco survives as well, and they run out into the jungle. So Zlatlan hasted, but the Skaven army is also destroyed.
Yeah. So as you kind of pointed out, is Tedo not being a tactical genius. The only thing that he can figure out, and he does figure this out a little bit late, is that he cannot save the city and the Slan Mage Priest. So he makes that choice of, well, screw the city, we got to save the Slan Mage Priest. They're more valuable.
Yeah,
so that's what leads to that. I was trying to find the passage in here, though, because everybody's got the giant joke that the Slan are space frogs, right? But there is actually a point in here where you touched on it. You said that they went into a chamber where, in the past, when they were under assault by demons, they were able to create this sort of protective dome, and when all the Slan went in there. But I was trying to find the passage because it talks about how they come across a spot where, in the council chamber, some things light up with whirring gadgetry and controls that none of them understand. And they all stand around and stare at one another and at the Slan for a little bit to see if something else happens, but nothing else happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens again in Itza, where the Skaven find a communication device.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's real, people. They are space frogs. They got the tech. Good.
Yeah, you're right. It does mention there's a little paragraph where chambers which haven't been unsealed in millennia open up, and there's just like weird flashing lights, and the skinks have no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, on that point, the Bastillodon kit, if you know it, one of them has the what is it called? The beam of Kotek. So it's got a little platform and then a crystal in the middle, and it shoots laser beams. And on the back there is a Slan who puts up his hand onto a little handprint to fire the beam. The interesting thing is, skinks have 4 fingers, but the little handprint has 1 for 5.
Oh.
So nothing in the Lizardman army has 5 fingers.
Hang on. Yeah, does Slan have 5 fingers?
No, Slan have like 3 or 4.
Right, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So obviously,
it's like, reverse Total Recall.
Only ogres can run that thing then.
Yeah, that must be it.
It's about the size of a Terminator hand.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, so before we, I was going to say, before we move on from that battle, I want to introduce another little sidebar when we're coming back to Grillock again, and he's stirring the pot and making the pox. What's curious about this little sidebar is that they kind of explain how they do the testing of the pox, right? So they've been stirring away, and this has been going on for months. And they feed a little bit of it to some poor sap, and they count the number of steps that he walks away from the cauldron before he collapses and dies. And that's how they measure the potency of it. So in this little sidebar, he makes it 11 steps, and a couple of guys are really excited about that. They're like, oh, that's super deadly. The guy can't even walk a dozen steps before he dies. But Grillock is like, no, we want the best of all time, the most hideous red pox. I am aiming for 6. I am going for a 6-step pox, and that is my goal, and I will settle for nothing less. And neither should Skrulk. I got to prove my worth. So I thought that was a curious little sidebar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. He's like the crazy guy from There's Something About Mary, right? Because it's like 6. 6 is it's not 7, it's 6. Like that's yeah. He's going for the most virulent ever. I also think that that's the most wonderful way to test something is the number of steps a slave can take. That's pretty hilarious. Wacky.
Yeah.
You know how to do it.
Well, so anything else to say about not Zlatlan? Anything else to say about Zlatlan before we move on to the next assault?
There goes one city for the Lizardmen.
There goes one army for the Skaven.
We got more armies than you've got cities.
I know.
1-to-1 is a winning battle for the Skaven.
Yeah. I like this. I'm going to play out. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to play up this rivalry between the two of you, the Lizardman sympathizer and the Skaven sympathizer throughout this whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I do. You know, you lost a few Slan mages and a whole entire Lizardman city. That's granted.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like much compared to the several hundreds of thousands of slaves and clan rats that were lost to the Skaven, but I'm still chalking this up on the plague pole as a win for the Skaven.
Yeah.
Oh, this one's a definite W for our column. Yeah, 100%. Like, this one's going on the Skaven side of the board.
All right. Okay, so then, Vince, why don't you, we're going to shift our attention then to Itza.
Yes.
It's all you.
All right, so Itza. Itza, a really old city. All right, so Itza is it is the first city, and it's this built, as Keith mentioned, they're all built on these sort of geomantic ley lines, and it's a very important one, and it is sort of the first city, and a lot of the very old Slan are here. And so the assault on Itza, what we get is Lord Gritch, who's a big, fat, plaguey guy who's riding a pox rat. He's leading this assault, and Lord Grillock is showing up to help him out, the guy that we just met a little while back, with some of his boxes, as well as the same standard accoutrement of plaguey things we would expect. And as we often mention the forces that are going to be arrayed here, I just want to point out real quick, in the red host, who we'll see in a little while, there is a skink priest atop a stegodon named Chili Pino, which is probably the funniest name for a skink priest I have ever seen. That's page 25, Chili Pino, the dreaded warrior. So, my personal favorite skink. I'll give that guy credit. He got a good name. So, basically, they roll up on Itza, and Lord Rich is sort of like setting up to assault the city, and he's waiting because the delivery of 1,000 poxes is late, which he's upset about. And then finally, Gritch hears the sound of the Contagion Conclave rolling up, and so he starts deploying out his war machines and all that sort of stuff. And very quickly, they go to work. Now, Itza is a big walled city. It's like all these cities. They are very, very heavily defended. And Itza, even despite the fact that the Lizardmen forces are sort of scattered and stretched, Itza is still quite well defended. The problem is that the Slan are all unconscious. And that's really what's letting the Skaven sort of get a leg up here in the early part of this battle, because there are a lot of those fat frogs in this city. Unfortunately, they're all comatodes. I got a million of them. All right, so they start bombing the city.
I got cloaks from all these puns.
Yes. So they start bombing the city. They line up their plague claw catapults, and they're tossing in and just sort of filling the city with pox. And what's most relevant here is this isn't just any pox. Like, this isn't your normal strength 2 stuff being thrown over the walls. Remember, this is their entire sort of arsenal of foul diseases that the Contagion Conclave has been brewing. And they fill so much of it that some of the temples just become coated as though it were raining, right? And it runs down into the sewers and begins smoking and creates this miasma of fog around the outer wall of the city, forcing the Lizardmen who are in there and the Saurus Old Blood who's in charge kind of pull his forces back, right? So he's kind of pulled into the center of the city. He can't, there's this big wall of plague, cloud, in between him and the enemy. Unfortunately, the Skaven are kind of like, they also can't really get in the walls. This is still a very heavily defended city, and the walls are not easy to get into. And so a day and a night passes, and they're kind of at a stalemate. They're just bombarding the city, but they're not really bringing it down, or like they're causing casualties. Of course, the contagion is killing Lizardmen, but not as much as they would wish. And in the middle of this, we get kind of a little aside. So I want to kind of pause in the middle of this. Things are going in the Skaven's favor, and we get this little aside. We go back to Lord Skrulk, who is drinking some vile plague to sort of regain his strength. And that's when he encounters a new player who's entered the field. And Skrulk basically senses this overwhelming corruption with his plague sight that's so strong, he thinks he's standing before Nurglich, but he realizes it's not quite that, it's something else. What he has come to is Vermilanx, which is our first named Vermin Lord. And Vermilanx is the Vermin Lord of Decay. And he tells Skrulk, basically, his presence is driving Skrulk almost to the brink of insanity, and he says, your plan will fail. This is not going to work. Okay? However, when everything has failed, victory can still be achieved if you call on me. Just remember me. And then he disappears in standard, super bad guy fashion. And Skrulk basically doubles down. He's like, okay, we're going to do this. And he kind of leads off, content that he's going to win. All right. So let's return to the battle. The Lizardmen are getting bombarded, and that's when, unfortunately, things turn against our heroes here, the Skaven, as a new player enters the battle in the form of Lizardman name. I'm going to call him, I've always called him Teeny Weeny, because that's how his name looks to me, but I know that's not really his name. So, Keith, would you like to say his real name?
I think it's Tangwan.
Okay. So, Teeny Weeny, the prophet of Sotek, he shows up. Now, he is most notable for commanding the Red Host, which is this big, sort of bloodthirsty wing of very vicious lizardmen, having a lot of like chameleon skinks and things like that. And they show that Clan Eshin aren't the only ninjas in the woods, and they sneak around, eliminate all the Skaven scouts and rear guards, and then all at once, wham! Hit him in the rear, and the Red Host descends upon Grish's Skaven and just tears them apart. They basically have them caught between their own plague wall in the city and the ditches that they've dug to keep the Lizardmen from escaping. And as the battle is really joined, a storm rolls in and soaks the jungle, so much so that it becomes, thick with mud. And so once again, just like in Zlatlan, the good guys lose because it rained. And the Skaven start slipping and drowning in the mud. And of course, the skinks are, the skinks and saurus of the jungle are well adept in this sort of terrain. That no mud's going to slow them down; they're used to it. And they basically slaughter every single Skaven here to a man. The Red Host is not known for leaving survivors, and they don't here either. They hunt every living thing, stab everybody, break every war machine. They send out Kreuger to smash them to tinder, and when their enemy is defeated, Tenawan looks out over this city, which is now nearly empty because of how much the plague has done, and he wonders if he saved anything but the buildings.
Yeah. What comes to mind right here is how crap do your troops have to be in a Skaven army to get rolled over as quickly as they did by skinks? Admittedly, raging, angry skinks, but still skinks. Like, come on.
Hey, I would just like to point out the Red Host has like 3 stegodons with it, okay? Like, that's a lot of stegodons. I'm just saying.
Even
you can't handle that many impact hits.
Back here?
Yeah. Played a game against Keith a couple weeks ago. He had 3 stegodons.
Sure did.
Oh, nice.
And I was Skaven. Yeah. It was a little bit punishing.
It is. They are a lot punishing, yes.
Yeah, so, but you're right in also pointing out that rain is obviously the bane of any contagion, whether it's Nurgle created or Clan Pestilence created.
Yes.
Yeah,
thank you. That's the other point. It washes away all the plague clouds, yes, hence letting Tenawan see into the city.
Yeah, the great pox of Clan Castilians couldn't stand a light drizzle and a bit of a breeze. Typical Skaven.
So sadly, I believe we must put the Battle of Itza into the W column for the Lizardmen. That's a big win for them.
Yeah, so we'll give that to you. That's even up 1-1 now.
Yeah. One thing that I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, as we were talking about astrological events, was the twin-tailed comet is pretty big in the sky right now, and you can see it during the day. And that is typically a portent of fortune for the lizardmen because it represents the forked tongue of a lizard and is the symbol of Sotek, who is the god that Tengwan is the prophet of. But when the time it seems, it blinks 13 times, which of course is the number of the Skaven. So once again, we've got stuff in the heavens playing out what's going on on the land. Which is
so what you're saying is you have an ambiguous portent that portends well for both sides.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So we're still even then, 1-1, even with that. Right. Well, as Keith said a few minutes ago, there's a third prong to this Skaven assault, and this is on the city of Zlanhuapek, which is also known as the City of Mists. Now, due to the nature of this city, is it's in a swampy region, and it is famously surrounded by a very, very thick, cloying mist. So the Skaven prepare for this in a couple of different ways, and Scroll assigns not one but two warlords to take care of this. One guy is named Scrimmanx, and he is your typical mass Skaven kind of army, slaves upon slaves upon slaves, and driving them by the whip and trying to overwhelm with numbers. The other player is a guy named Lord Blistrox, so he's a Clan Pestilence guy that comes under a little bit of scrutiny. He's not as famous as Scrimmanx, but the reason he comes under scrutiny is because he has a little bit of a team up with some Clan Scryer fellas, and there's a guy that's named Rekit, I think is his name, and he has offered up his services and says that I have created this kind of scrying, far-seeing device which I can use to see through any kind of barriers, including this kind of mist that's around the city that we're assaulting. And Blistrox is really the only guy that believes in him, whereas everybody else is skeptical. So we're kind of going to approach this tale by coming from two different sides, where Scrimmanx is coming from the south. So we'll talk about him first. Now Scrimmanx, as we said, is full of slaves, and he's just driving them along. But to handle the mist, what he's decided to do is he's decided to put a flaming brazier with each claw pack of these Skaven slaves, but then also chain them together so that they don't lose each other and get scattered within the mists, and use these beacons that they're carrying as what the rest of the army can follow behind. And this is how he's going to get his way through the mist. So as they do that, it still seems disorienting, and sounds don't travel as well, and they're all creeped out. They're losing a few people that are getting nibbled off the ends, both by drowning in the water or by being attacked by various denizens of the mists. Many of them being skinks who do hit-and-run attacks, much like they do in the jungles outside of Itza. But they also, there's one point in here where even the pale, blind Troglodyte actually has an effect on the battle here, where he's lying in wait, and then as the Skaven pass, he leaps out of the bogs and gobbles up a couple of dozen slaves before he's beaten away. But it gets to a point where, in all this, even Scrimmanx feels that he's kind of losing touch, and things are falling apart, and he gets to feel a bit nervous about it. So he calls the clan packs to come together, and his plague monks start pulling in on the chains to bring them back in, and realizes that the chains are slack and there's nothing at the end of it except for some meaty stump of an arm. But yet, those beacons are still out there. So now he starts to feel that he's being led on by whatever skink denizens and lizardman beings are out there. They seem to be killing off whoever's holding his censer bears and then leading them around with this. So Scrimmanx eventually just decides, I've lost too much here, things aren't going well, I'm pulling the plug. And he backs out. He just turns what he can left around to save his own ass, and gets the heck out of there, just to show another aspect of how Skaven warlords live to tell the tales of another day. So Keith, do you feel this is a win already? Is Scrimmanx going away?
Oh yeah. This is how Lizardmen like to fight. We're skulking around our swamps and attaching giant monsters to the ends of chains so that when you reel them in, you get a nice surprise. Yeah, doing all right.
I agree. Cheating is how lizardmen like to fight.
Coming from a Skaven. Pot, kettle, black. Anybody? No?
Good. Well, and how do you feel about this one, Vince? Do you feel this is a insurmountable defeat?
Oh no, he got exactly. Honestly, Scrimex gets exactly what he deserves because Skaven need to win by their cunning, and he proved he was not up to the task. He tried to win by brute force, just pushing forward. And that is not how Skaven win. You have to use your forces very smartly if you want to win as one of the Verminous Horde. Only the most brilliant ascend. He deserved to lose.
Yeah. Well, so that's a good segue into our other side. So we're going to flip over to the north side of the city now, where it's led by Blistrox and his handyman, his crafty handyman Rikit. So Rikit's got his own scrying device, but he's also planted warlocks around with the other regiments, so that they have the same sort of scrying devices, and they communicate with one another very closely along the way. So unlike Scrimex, their advance is very slow. It's very methodical, but they are able to use the advantage, and Rikit's devices do in fact work. So all of the tricksy things that the Lizardmen were trying to do by coming up 2 feet away from him in the mist and putting a blowpipe through their brains, they're not able to pull off. So the harassing is much, much less successful. And to jump ahead to the quick is eventually the bulk of that Skaven force successfully reaches the outskirts of the city. Now, they're presented, of course, by the resistance that's there of Saurus cohorts and skinks. But unfortunately, as Keith alluded to much earlier, is a lot of the forces that were garrisons of all these cities were drawn away to the different city where Krokgar was, so that they can fight off the demon incursion. So the resistance is pretty small here, aside from the temple guard who actually stay at the temples to protect the slans. But there's one other reveal here that also, being that Blistrox is a crafty man who's willing to use all the resources, once they get into the city, he releases a whole clan that has been disguised as Pestilence Plagues monks, and reveals that they are in fact Night Runners and Gutter Runners and Skaven assassins from Clan Eshin. So those are the guys that go off while the bulk of the force beats down the Lizardmen resistance in the streets to scurry and find their way into the Lizardmen temples. Because the ultimate goal here, of course, is to slay the squishy mage priests. So let's move to that here real briefly. And there is a really cool scene, in fact, where some of these Night Runners and Gutter Runners get themselves into the inner sanctum of a temple, and they're about to slay a Slan mage priest of great importance who is named, and I'm going to try this name because it's fun to say, Huini Tenukali, I think. That's how I want to pronounce that.
I like
you guys
it.
want to try your handle at that one?
No.
Sound okay? All right. We'll go with that. But he is being guarded by one of the greatest of all the temple guards of all time. This is our man Chakax, who is a great defender of challenges. So we have a really great cinematic scene where the Gutter Runners find their way into the chamber, and Chakax is stoically there awaiting them, doing his guard job. And we've got assassins dropping from the ceiling and Gutter Runners hurling their ninja stars at him, and banking off of his side, and his hide is protecting him. Although he does at one point get a dirty stab from a weeping blade that finds the chinks of his armor, and these poison blades, of course, are very venomous and kill most everybody. But Chakax shows the endurance of ages, and he does not succumb. And he does all of his best to beat off these Gutter Runners and seal the gate behind him, thus, at least for the moment, protecting his slanny buddy and achieving the goals of what a good temple guard is meant to do. So, when we measure this one out, guys, as it sort of comes to a close to that battle, Vince, how do you feel about this one? Win or loss
Well,
for
I
the
mean, we've
Skaven?
got the city. we kill some of the fat frogs, but we don't get control of all the temples, right? Some of the frogs remain, and they're like we can't. Some of those nuts are a little too tough to crack. So as it sits at that point, it's certainly a Skaven victory. I mean, because given enough time, of course, eventually the Skaven would, get in there and get rid of those frogs. Unfortunately, time is the one thing that the Skaven are not going to have as this progresses here.
Yeah. Keith, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the Lizardmen are pretty hard pressed, and one of the mage priests they actually get is so there's one frog, and he's floating over a little pool, and he's belching out little bits of mist that get swept away, and he's the guy who's keeping the whole protection for the city going, and the Skaven managed to get him, so that was a bit of a loss. But I just wanted to point out how Chakax actually managed to dispatch the assassin. What he did in the end was he had a weeping blade in his leg, so he took that out, and he picked the guy up by the head, and then just got his massive great weapon, and then batter up, knocked a home run. It was great.
Yeah,
So
he
he rolled
it
very high on those D3 wounds.
Yeah, no, he rolled a 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, must
So
have.
I'm willing to call that one a tie.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we lost one Skaven warlord out of that, and actually, there's a little sidebar that maybe I'll go to now, and that is that Blistrox slinks his way out of the city, feeling that he hasn't quite achieved what he wanted to. I mean, yeah, he got into the city, and as you say, Vince, he clubbed all the Lizardmen resistance down, but he wasn't able to achieve that ultimate goal of killing all of the slam mages that were there before they awoken. So he slinks back and he has to face Skrolt, and he is abating himself, and he's ready. He's ready for the staff whack of failure and the dirty shillelagh that's gonna kill him off. But instead, Skrolt does something that Blistrox wasn't expecting, and he says, "You know what? We still have a lot of work to do," and he tosses Scrimank's head towards Blistrox for him to keep as a little souvenir, and sort of tipping off that, despite the fact that you feel you failed, this other guy failed a whole lot worse than you, so you're still in. Effectively, is what he offers up to him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So do you want to go through how the Skaven army was eventually broken from the City of the Mist?
Yeah, Vince, do you want to? Yeah, you haven't had a lot for a little while. Do you want to pick up from there, or do you want to take that, Keith? Either of you.
Well, yeah. Let's let Keith do this one because I want the next part for sure. So this is going to be a good victory for the Lizardmen, and they don't get a lot of those, so I feel like he should have this.
Yeah.
Well, so this army, Blistrox's army, he's recruiting from a lot of other clans, and he's got a bunch of the Thrall clans as well. So a lot of his Skaven aren't as disciplined as the regular clan Castilian guys. So they're looting, and one of the cool things that we mentioned earlier was they come upon this device of the Great Beyond, which is a transstellar communicator, and this weird voice starts crackling over in a language that the Skaven can't understand. So the Warplock engineers come in and just shoot it with their pistols until it stops making noises, which I thought was nice. But
I'm pretty sure that one of them in Skaven said "boring conversation" anyways when he shot it. Like that was Han Solo the Rat.
Exactly. He always shoots first.
Mm-hmm.
So while this is going on, the demon onslaught that Kroq-Gar has been keeping at bay has dwindled, and the rift is closing. And I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of in tune with the unraveling of the Great Vortex that we saw in Kane. But essentially it frees up Kroq-Gar to come in, and he just comes in and routs the entire army. I mean, he's got all of his Saurus legions backing up. Pterodon riders come in to help break up the place, and he just charges in headfirst on Grimlock. And the Skaven they're not the most courageous of animals, shall we say. So they break and they run away.
I think that's pretty accurate. Yes, that is exactly correct. Many warlord heads adorn Kroq-Gar's belt by the end of it.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
As an aside, think I have a feeling that the timing of this, when the demons sort of all abate, if that's a parallel across the whole Warhammer world, then that kind of comes in tune with the start of the Elf campaign around that time, right?
Oh,
As
okay.
well as at the time just before Nagash's ritual is completed. So in those two kind of parallels at different places, I think is where the demons sort of come to rest and they abate a little bit. I think it's around that timing. Good. All right. Well, take us home with a little bit of the aftermath, then, Vince, of how the Skaven feel about their first campaign.
Yes. So at the end of chapter 1, we've got it 2-1 in the Lizardmen favor, right? And and even the win was perhaps somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory for the Skaven because they lost basically that whole army. And the normal Skaven thing to do, as we mentioned earlier at the beginning of this, would be to collapse in the face of bickering and blame, right? It's this person's fault and this person's fault, and people are executed left and right, and civil war breaks out, and normal Skaven things occur, and hence their entire great plan fails. However, this is exactly as the Vermin Lord had predicted, and he shows back up and basically, gets Skrulk back on the message, and Skrulk is just everywhere because there's still tons of Skaven. Like, they lost 3 armies. That isn't even a dent. Okay, that was the beginnings. They sent out the vanguard at those 3 cities. They've got reinforcements coming from across the old world because this continent is going down. And but it wouldn't matter because how many there are if they're all engaged in a civil war and not fighting lizardmen. And Skrulk goes everywhere and is like, no, we're not doing that. We're staying on the plan. We are going to beat these lizards. We are going to conquer this continent. And wherever he goes, he quells the dissent and the civil war. And he, with the backing of his Vermin Lord sort of power broker, managed to restore order and bring the army back onto message. And it closes with Lord Skrulk knew that this time Clan Pestilence was going to be triumphant.
Good. So that's the foreboding of more to come for the Skaven. And you're right. I kind of believe you that this is the first time in a long time that they don't just scurry away at the first signs of defeat. They show some resolve, which is not very Skaven-like. But we do have a final bit of word here as well from the Lizardmen. So Keith, the Slan Mage priests start coming to again.
Yeah,
So
they start to wake up.
A final word from the Slan Mage perspective.
So they start to wake up and they cast their visions into the ether or whatever you want to call it, and they start basically to take stock of what's happened since they've been locked unconscious. So they note that there are massive gaps in the geomantic web and the loss of Zlatlan that was destroyed by Tederaco's comet. They also then start looking out into the wider world. So they realize that they assert the presence of the cold new power, which is the rebirth of Nagash. So that gives us a good link into the timeline. So as they wake up, that's when Nagash is coming back. And then they can start to feel as well the tremors from the Great Vortex. And this is where Nagash has stolen the Wind of Death from that as well. So that begins to unravel. But they also then go back to the Hutek, which is where Krokgar was fighting, and that rift of demons, and kind of noticed that no more demons were coming out of it anymore. And that kind of made them worried. I mean, it's basically been a non-stop onslaught of demons since that rift ever opened. And they're worried because chaos is the ancient enemy, right? And so they know that this is coming. And then there's this really great closing line where it says, "From the limit of perception came a far-off rumbling. Like thunder over the horizon, it was an unnatural sound, like the mocking laughter of dark gods." So again, it's coming back to, it doesn't matter, what all of the individual armies are doing and who's doing what or whatever. It's all about this war against the Dark Gods.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I like the fact that makes us a nice, very clear timestamp to sort of draw the parallels again to the rest of the Warhammer world, and to give us a gauge of where we're at when we compare it to the Nagash story and the Kane story, especially. So that's real good. Yeah. Right. Well, people out there, that brings us to the conclusion of chapter 1. But we'll give our philosophers an opportunity. Maybe I'll pose you this question, Vince. Who's your hero from chapter 1?
It's Stroke, definitely, because he's the one who saves the entire plan, right? I mean, without him, this whole thing would have collapsed in on itself. But the eyeless one is coming through here, and he's teeing up a home run.
Yeah. How about you, Keith? Who's your hero from chapter 1?
I think it's got to be Mazdamundi. I mean, he's moving comets and making mind shields and all that kind of stuff. What he did in the beginning, it didn't get very much written space, but he's definitely a powerhouse, something to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, he probably saved them from defeat right there.
Right? Oh yeah,
because,
completely. Yep.
Yeah.
There wouldn't have been anything to defend if he hadn't done that.
Good. All right, fellas. Well, the rivalry will continue at some point in the future. The Skaven and the Lizardmen aren't done. But we're going to turn our attentions to a different part of the map for Chapter 2 when we come back at you for some more end times. Good night for now.
Good night.
In their mind-walking, the Slan hovered over Zakutek. The rift in reality in the City of Echoes was strangely becalmed. For the first time in years, no demons issued forth from that tear in the world's fabric. It was dangerous for the spirit consciousnesses of the Slan to contemplate that forsaken place too long. What lived on the other side of the veil could discern them. The cold logic of the Slan's presence shone like a beacon to those in a realm of insatiable desires and swirling emotion. In the past, the dark powers had sought to entangle the Slan, to lock their agile minds into labyrinthine traps that befuddled their thoughts. Now, however, there was no sign of this old threat, but a niggling echo troubled the Slan still. From the limit of perception came a far-off rumbling, like thunder over the horizon. It was an unnatural sound, like the mocking laughter of the gods.